Nick, someone special is coming to see us today, Angela said as a woman rang the doorbell. Nick had no idea what was going on. Angela opened the door and invited the woman inside, then turned back to Nick. "This is Rachel, your birth mother." Nick was stunned and had no idea how to face the situation. He had always known that Angela was not his birth mother, but for the past 18 years, he had seen her as the only mother he had ever known. Now another woman had come into his home claiming to be his birth mother, leaving him confused about what he was supposed to do. Rachel began to speak. "Nick, I was the one who gave you your name. I'm sorry, I couldn't take care of you all these years. I hope you'll let me explain." Angela stood nearby watching Nick, tears falling from her eyes, unsure whether she was happy or sad about what was happening. And Nick stood between two mothers, one who had given birth to him and one who had raised him for the past 18 years. Angela had never been good at meeting new people. For most of her 20s, her life followed the same routine. She went to work each morning, spent the day processing claims at a local insurance company in Dallas, then went home. She had coworkers she got along with, but she rarely joined them after work, and she never made much effort to date. By the time Angela turned 30, most of the people she had grown up with were already married. Some had children starting school. Angela still lived alone and had begun to think that might simply be how her life would stay. Then she met Daniel. He worked at a warehouse, where long shifts were spent moving heavy loads, loading shipments, and keeping orders moving on schedule. Daniel was not wealthy, and neither was Angela. But he was dependable, patient, and comfortable with the quiet life Angela preferred. They married when Angela was 30 and settled into a modest house in Dallas. Angela kept her job at the insurance company. Daniel continued working at the warehouse. They paid their bills, saved what they could, and spent most evenings at home. For the first time, Angela no longer returned to an empty house. Before long, the two of them began talking about having a child. Angela expected pregnancy to happen naturally. When the first year passed, she told herself they had time. After the second year, she began paying closer attention to every month that ended the same way. At 33, Angela finally went through medical testing. The results gave her an answer she had not wanted. She was unlikely to ever become pregnant. Angela brought the news home to Daniel. She had spent the drive thinking about how to tell him, but when she finally did, there was little she could add to what the doctor had already said. Daniel sat beside her and listened. Angela worried that he would see the future differently now. Instead, he told her he had married her, not the children they might have had. They stayed together and returned to their normal routine. Angela went back to the insurance office. Daniel kept working at the warehouse. They stopped planning a nursery and stopped talking about baby names. When friends or relatives asked whether they wanted children, Angela learned to give a short answer and change the subject. Daniel never blamed her, but the empty room they had once imagined turning into a nursery remained empty. 2 years later, another part of Angela's life disappeared. Daniel was still working physically, demanding shifts at the warehouse when he began receiving treatment for a heart condition. Angela knew about the problem, but neither of them understood how serious it would become. Daniel died when Angela was 35. After the funeral, Angela returned to the same house they had shared. His work boots were still where he had left them. His clothes were still in the closet. For the first few weeks, Angela sometimes came home from work and caught herself expecting to hear him somewhere in the house. But there was no one there. At 35, Angela had lost the husband she had waited so long to find. The child they had once planned for had never come, and the house that had briefly become a home for two belonged to Angela alone again. Angela did not make any major changes after Daniel died. She kept the house and returned to the same job at the insurance company. Most mornings, she left at the same time. Most evenings, she came home, made dinner for one, watched television for a while, and went to bed. Months became years that way. Angela was not completely cut off from other people. She spoke to coworkers, occasionally went out when someone invited her, and handled everything that needed to be handled. But she had never found it easy to meet new people, and after losing Daniel, she made even less effort to start over. What began to affect her most were ordinary things she had once barely noticed. At the grocery store, a woman might be trying to keep one child beside the cart while another asked for something from the next aisle. At the mall, Angela saw mothers carrying shopping bags while their children walked beside them. Sometimes she passed families eating together and found herself watching the small interruptions, the questions, the complaints, the mother cutting food for a younger child while trying to finish her own meal. Angela did not want someone else's husband or someone else's life. What she noticed was the child beside them. She had wanted that once. After the doctor told her she could not become pregnant, she had tried to accept that the chance was gone. After Daniel died, she stopped thinking about it at all. But by the time Angela reached 40, 5 years had passed since she had last shared her home with anyone. One afternoon, after buying groceries, she walked toward the parking lot behind a mother and her young son. The boy kept talking while his mother loaded bags into the car, and she answered him without stopping what she was doing. Angela put her own groceries in the trunk and drove back to the quiet house she had lived in alone for 5 years. That evening, she began looking into adoption. Angela did not make the decision in one night. She started by reading. Then she contacted an adoption agency and asked questions about the process. She learned that wanting a child was only the beginning. There would be applications, background checks, financial records, interviews, home visits, references, and questions about why a 40-year-old widow wanted to become a mother on her own. Angela answered them. She showed that she had a steady job, a stable home, and enough income to support a child. She talked about Daniel, her infertility, and the years she had spent alone after his death. She also had to think about what raising a child would actually require. There would be childcare while she worked, medical costs, food, clothes, and years of expenses she had never carried before. Angela reviewed her savings and monthly bills. She knew she would not be able to give a child everything, but she could provide a safe home and a stable life. The process took time. There were forms to complete, appointments to attend, and periods when Angela could do nothing but wait. She did not tell many people. She had spent too many years learning that wanting something did not mean she would receive it, so she kept going to work and returning to the same quiet house while the agency continued its review. Then one day, Angela received a call about a baby boy who needed a permanent home. His name was Nick. He was 6 months old. The first time Angela saw Nick, he did not reach for her. He sat in another woman's arms and watched her with the uncertain expression of a 6-month-old who knew she was a stranger. When Angela held him, his body stiffened. A few seconds later, he began to cry. Angela tried changing the way she held him. That only made him cry harder. The woman beside her showed Angela how he preferred to be carried, and eventually Nick settled down enough to stare at her again. Angela had imagined this meeting many times during the adoption process. None of those versions included a baby crying the moment she picked him up, but she went home thinking about him. Soon, the house began filling with things that had never been there before. A crib went into the room Angela and Daniel had once imagined using for a child. Bottles appeared in the kitchen. Diapers filled a cabinet. Angela moved anything breakable from the lower shelves, even though Nick was not crawling far yet. On the day she finally brought him home, she carried him through the front door and set his things down wherever there was space. By evening, the house was already messier than it had been that morning. That first night, Nick woke more than once. Angela fed him, changed him, walked through the hallway with him in her arms, and tried to understand why he was still crying. Nothing worked for long. Near morning, she sat down with Nick against her chest. He finally fell asleep. Angela stayed where she was, afraid that moving him would wake him again. A few hours later, she would have to get up and begin another day. She was tired. The house was untidy, and she had no idea how long it would take before she stopped questioning whether she was doing everything wrong. But for the first time in 5 years, Angela was no longer the only person living there. The first months were harder than Angela had expected. Reading about babies had taught her what to buy and when to feed them. It had not taught her how to tell the difference between a hungry cry, a tired cry, and a baby who simply refused to sleep. Nick woke her at hours when she had once been asleep. Some mornings, Angela arrived at the insurance office already tired, worked through the day, then came home knowing the second half of her day was only beginning. Childcare had to fit around her work schedule. Bottles had to be prepared. Laundry seemed to multiply faster than she could wash it. The first time Nick developed a fever, Angela checked his temperature so often that she finally called the doctor because she no longer trusted herself to judge whether it was getting worse. She spent that night beside his crib and went to work the next morning after barely sleeping. There were also mistakes. Angela once packed everything Nick might need for a short trip and still forgot the one thing she needed first. Another time, she spent nearly an hour trying to settle him before realizing he was uncomfortable because of something simple she should have checked earlier. She learned by doing the same things again the next day. Gradually, she stopped panicking over every cry. She learned how Nick liked to be held, which sounds helped him sleep, and how to finish making dinner with one hand when he refused to be put down. The baby, who had cried the first time she held him, began recognizing her voice. There were evenings when someone else could pick him up and he would still turn his head, searching for Angela. One night, after she came home later than usual, Nick began fussing in the arms of the woman caring for him. Angela had barely stepped through the door when he reached toward her. She put down her bag and took him. Nick settled against her before she had even removed her coat. Angela did not need anyone to explain what had changed. By the time Nick began walking, Angela's house no longer looked like the quiet home she had once shared with Daniel. Toys appeared under furniture. Small fingerprints showed up on places Angela had just cleaned. She learned to keep things out of reach, then had to move them higher again when Nick discovered how to climb. Her schedule changed with him. Mornings began earlier because getting herself ready was no longer enough. After work, there were groceries to buy, meals to prepare, baths to give, and clothes to wash before the next day. Angela also learned how quickly a child could change a monthly budget. Nick outgrew clothes before some of them looked worn. Childcare took a regular share of her paycheck. There were diapers, medicine, shoes, and small expenses that rarely arrived one at a time. Angela did not raise Nick in poverty, but she could no longer spend money without thinking about what else might be needed that month. When Nick was still young, Angela once stood in a store holding a winter coat she had planned to buy for herself. Nick had outgrown his shoes again, and the pair he needed cost more than she had expected. Angela put the coat back and bought the shoes. She did not mention the choice to anyone. The next winter, she was still wearing the same coat. Nick had already outgrown another pair of shoes. Years passed and decisions like that. Some were larger, most were not. Angela adjusted the grocery list, postponed something for herself, or waited until the next paycheck. What mattered was that Nick had what he needed. The house became louder as he grew. He ran from room to room, asked questions faster than Angela could answer them, and followed her into the kitchen when she was trying to cook. Angela sometimes missed the silence after putting him to bed. But whenever Nick spent a night away from home, she noticed how quickly the silence returned. Angela never intended to let Nick grow up, believing she had given birth to him. She did not want the truth to arrive through an old document, a careless comment, or someone else who thought he already knew. So she began explaining it while he was still young enough for the answer to be simple. She told him that another woman had given birth to him, and that Angela had become his mother when he was 6 months old. At first, Nick accepted this the way children accept many things adults tell them. He asked whether he had lived in another house. Angela explained what she knew. He asked why she had chosen him. Angela told him she had wanted to be his mother. Then Nick returned to whatever he had been doing. As he grew older, the questions changed. One day, he asked why his birth mother had not kept him. Angela had no answer. She could have guessed, but she refused to turn a guess into the story Nick carried about himself. "I don't know," she told him. "I only know she was very young." Nick thought about that. "Did she not want me?" Angela moved closer to him. "I don't know why she left, Nick. But not knowing the reason doesn't mean you get to choose the worst one." It was one of the few answers Angela could give him with certainty. She did not know Rachel's name then. She did not know where the woman had gone or whether she still thought about the son she had left behind. What Angela knew was that Nick had a right to ask, and she would never make him feel disloyal for doing it. Nick did not spend his childhood constantly talking about his birth mother. Most days, she was not part of his life at all. He had school, friends, homework, scraped knees, birthdays, and a mother waiting for him at home. But the questions returned from time to time. When a class assignment asked students to bring in baby pictures, Nick wanted to know whether Angela had any from before he was 6 months old. She did not. When he was older, he asked whether he looked like the woman who gave birth to him. Angela told him she had never seen her. Once, after noticing that his hair and features looked nothing like hers, Nick asked whether Angela ever wished he looked more like her. "No," she said. "I already know you're mine," Nick smiled and went back to what he was doing. Angela never treated those questions as a threat. If Nick wanted to know where he came from one day, she would help him with whatever information she had. For years, however, there was very little to give him. So Nick grew up with an unanswered part of his history, while the rest of his life continued in front of him. Angela attended school meetings, waited through doctor appointments, reminded him about homework, and argued with him when his room became impossible to walk through. By the time Nick reached his early teens, he no longer asked about his birth mother very often. Angela assumed the questions had become less important. She did not know they had simply become questions Nick had learned to carry without asking. As Nick grew, the expenses changed with him. Diapers disappeared, but school supplies took their place. Then came field trips, sports shoes, a phone, and the laptop he eventually needed for schoolwork. Angela's salary had increased over the years, but so had the cost of almost everything else. One August, just before Nick started a new school year, he needed new shoes, several supplies for his classes, and money for a school activity. In the same week, Angela's car needed a repair she could not postpone because she relied on it to get to work. Angela sat at the kitchen table that evening with the bills in front of her. Nick came in for a drink and saw her moving numbers around on a sheet of paper. "Are we in trouble?" he asked. Angela looked up. "No. Then why have you been doing that for 20 minutes? Angela put down the pen. She told him they had enough for what they needed. It simply meant some things would wait until the next paycheck. Nick looked at the list and understood that the things waiting were hers. He offered to skip the school activity. Angela refused. "You're going." "Mom, I don't have to." "I know. You're still going." She found a way to cover everything that mattered. Nick went on the activity with his classmates. The car was repaired. The things Angela had planned to buy for herself waited. After that, Nick began paying more attention. He noticed when Angela compared prices instead of taking the first item from a shelf. He noticed how often she said she did not need something she had been planning to replace. Angela never asked him to keep track. He started doing it on his own. By his teenage years, Nick was more outgoing than Angela had ever been. He made friends easily, joined conversations without being invited into them, and could turn a quick trip to the store into 3 separate conversations with people he knew. At home, however, he understood more than Angela realized. He knew she had raised him on one income. He knew there was no second parent to call when a bill arrived, the car broke down, or she was too tired to cook. Nick began taking school more seriously. Angela never demanded perfect grades, but he pushed himself because he knew what she had already spent years giving him. When he was old enough, he sometimes talked about finding a part-time job. Angela did not object to him earning his own money, but she refused to let work become an excuse to neglect school. "Your job is to give yourself more choices than I had," she told him. Nick listened. He helped where he could, paid for some of his smaller wants when he had money of his own, and stopped asking Angela for things simply because other students had them. He was still a teenager. He left dishes where they did not belong, forgot things Angela had reminded him about, and sometimes came home later than he had promised. But he no longer saw the house, the groceries, or the life around him as things that had simply appeared. He understood that one person had been holding them together for years. That understanding changed the way Nick looked at his future. He did not want Angela's sacrifices to become a debt he spent his life trying to repay. He wanted to make sure they had led somewhere. Angela was around 50 when the pain first became difficult to ignore. It started in her knees after long days at work. Then her fingers sometimes felt stiff in the morning, and cold or wet weather made the aching worse. At first, Angela treated it like another inconvenience. She bought pain relievers, used a heating pad, and kept doing what she had always done. Nick noticed before she began talking about it. He saw how she sometimes held the kitchen counter for support after standing too long, or how she rubbed one knee before getting up from the couch. One evening, he found her sitting with a heating pad wrapped around her leg. "How long has that been hurting?" he asked. Angela gave him the answer she usually gave when she did not want him to worry. "It comes and goes." Nick sat beside her and began rubbing the muscles around her knee. Angela told him he did not have to do that. "I know," he said. He kept going. It became a habit. When Angela's hands were stiff, Nick rubbed them while they watched television. If her knees hurt after shopping, he brought her the heating pad. Sometimes Angela told him exactly where the pain was. Other times, Nick could tell by the way she moved. He learned not to make a big event out of it. He would sit down beside her, take one of her hands, and start working the stiffness out of her fingers while continuing whatever conversation they were already having. Angela still worked, drove, shopped, and managed her own life. She did not need Nick to take care of everything. But as the years passed, there were more days when his help made the evening easier. By high school, Nick had become one of the stronger students in his class. Science interested him most, and he began asking questions about what it would take to become a doctor. The answer was not simple. He would need 4 years of college, the right science courses, strong grades, the MCAT, and then medical school if he made it that far. The path would take years and cost more money than Nick had ever seriously thought about. Angela did not discourage him. She also did not pretend it would be easy. They looked at colleges around Dallas and talked about starting with the next step instead of worrying about every year at once. Nick became especially interested in medicine because illness no longer felt like an abstract subject to him. He had spent years watching Angela manage pain that could make a simple day harder without stopping her from going to work or taking care of what needed to be done. One evening, while he was massaging her hand, Angela asked why he kept talking about becoming a doctor when he knew how long the training would take. Nick pressed his thumb carefully into the stiff joint at the base of her finger. "Maybe by the time I'm done, I'll finally know what I'm doing with these." Angela pulled her hand away and inspected it. "Then you need more school." That was terrible. Nick laughed and took her hand back. The joke passed, but the plan did not. By his final year of high school, Nick was seriously preparing for a college path that could lead to medicine. Angela knew she could help him begin. She also knew the years ahead would require money neither of them had yet figured out. The last years before Nick graduated were filled with routines neither of them considered important enough to remember at the time. They bought groceries together because Nick could carry the heavier bags and because Angela had learned not to let him choose snacks without checking the cart. On weekends, they sometimes went shopping for things one of them needed and came home with something completely different. Nick drove once he was old enough, though Angela still gave directions on roads he had traveled many times. When her joints hurt, he carried more of the bags. When he was hungry, which Angela thought was most of the time, he opened the refrigerator and asked why there was nothing to eat while standing in front of food she had bought 2 days earlier. They argued over small things. Nick left shoes where Angela could trip over them. Angela called him when he was 10 minutes late. He complained that she worried too much, then checked whether she had taken her pain medicine when the weather changed. There were evenings when they ate in front of the television and barely spoke. There were errands when Nick talked through the entire drive. Sometimes he massaged Angela's knees while studying from notes spread across the couch. Other times, she told him to stop and finish his work. As graduation approached, Nick spent more time thinking about college. He was used to Dallas. His friends were there. Angela was there. The schools he had been considering were close enough that he could imagine continuing the life he already knew while beginning the next part of it. Angela never asked him to stay nearby for her. Nick had simply never given much thought to leaving. On the day Nick graduated from high school, Angela arrived early enough to find a good seat. She had spent the morning checking things Nick had already checked himself and reminding him about things he had no chance of forgetting. Nick complained, but he let her take more pictures than he wanted before they left the house. At the ceremony, Angela watched rows of students cross the stage before Nick's name was called. When he walked up to receive his diploma, she raised her phone to take another picture. That was when her own phone began vibrating in her hand. Angela almost ignored it. Then she saw the name of the adoption agency. They had not called her in years. She stepped away from the noise before answering. The woman on the other end confirmed Angela's identity, then told her why she was calling. Nick's birth mother had come looking for him. She had returned to the United States and wanted to make contact. Angela said nothing at first. Through the doors behind her, she could still hear the graduation ceremony. 18 years earlier, the agency had called about a 6-month-old boy who needed a permanent home. Now, on the day that boy became a high school graduate, they were calling about the woman who had given birth to him. The agency representative asked when Angela would be available to discuss what happened next. Angela looked through the open doorway. Nick had returned to his seat and was talking to the student beside him. "Tomorrow," she said. "Call me tomorrow." The woman began to explain that there was no need to decide anything right away. Angela stopped her. "Today is my son's graduation. I want him to have today." She ended the call and returned to her seat before Nick noticed she had been gone. Angela did not tell Nick about the call after the ceremony. He was surrounded by classmates and families, taking pictures, laughing, and making plans to see people he had spent years with. Angela stood beside him when he wanted another photo and held his diploma when he needed both hands free. When Nick asked why she seemed distracted, she blamed the long day. He accepted the answer. That evening, they went out for dinner as they had planned. Nick talked about the ceremony, the summer ahead, and the schools he was still considering. He complained about one of the pictures Angela had posted and then asked her to send him the same picture. Angela listened. More than once, she thought about telling him. Each time, she decided it could wait until morning. Nothing would be gained by taking the rest of that day away from him. After dinner, they walked back to the car together. Nick asked whether she wanted him to drive. Angela told him she was perfectly capable of driving home. He took the keys from her anyway. "Your knees hurt." "My knees always hurt." Exactly. Angela let him drive. On the way home, Nick talked about college again. He still imagined staying in Dallas. He still assumed the biggest decision ahead of him was which school to attend. Angela sat beside him, knowing that a woman he had asked about since childhood was waiting to meet him. When they reached the house, Nick went inside first and turned on the lights. Angela followed him through the same front door where she had carried him in at 6 months old. She had spent 18 years telling Nick he had every right to know where he came from. Now that the chance had arrived, Angela did not know what it might ask her to give up. The morning after graduation, Nick came into the living room expecting an ordinary day. Angela had already been awake for hours. She had spoken to the adoption agency again and agreed to let Rachel come to the house, but she had not yet told Nick why. When the doorbell rang, Angela told him she was expecting someone and went to answer it. A woman Nick had never seen before was standing outside. Angela brought her into the house. Rachel kept her eyes on Nick, but she did not move toward him. Nick looked at Angela, waiting for an explanation. "Nick, this is Rachel," Angela said. "She's the woman who gave birth to you." Nick turned back to the stranger. The questions he had asked as a child had never included this moment. He had wondered who his birth mother was and why she had left, but he had never expected her to appear in the house the morning after his graduation. Rachel told him that she had given him his name and apologized for not being there to raise him. She asked for the chance to explain what had happened. Nick did not answer. He looked at Angela again, as if she might tell him what he was supposed to do next. But Angela had no answer for him. For 18 years, she had been the person Nick came to whenever he did not know what to do. This was the first question she could not answer for him. Rachel took another step toward Nick, but he moved back before she could come any closer. The confusion on his face had begun turning into anger. "You knew where I was?" he asked. Rachel tried to answer, but Nick continued. "For 18 years? Nick, it wasn't that simple." "Then make it simple." Rachel told him she had spent years trying to build a life stable enough to come back. She said she had returned to the United States for him and now lived in Austin. There was a room waiting for him there. She wanted him to come with her, get to know her, and let her take care of what she had failed to do before. Nick stared at her. "You left me for 18 years, and now you want me to go home with you?" "I'm asking for a chance. This is my home." Rachel tried to tell him that she understood his anger, but Nick did not want to hear more. He turned toward Angela. "Did you know she was coming?" Angela told him about the call she had received during his graduation ceremony. Nick looked at her, then back at Rachel. "I already have a mother," he pointed toward Angela. "Her." Rachel's face changed, but Nick was already walking toward the door. She called his name and started after him. Angela reached out and stopped her. "Don't. He thinks I abandoned him. Right now, he thinks a lot of things." Rachel looked toward the door Nick had just closed behind him. "I need to explain. Not while he's this angry." Angela released her arm. "Give him time." The house became quiet after Nick left. Rachel remained near the door as if she might still ignore Angela and go after him. Then she looked around the room. There were framed school pictures on the walls, photographs from birthdays, and a graduation picture Angela had printed only that morning. Rachel stopped in front of one of Nick as a young boy. "I missed all of it," she said. Angela did not answer. Rachel moved to another photograph. "His first day of school?" "First grade." Rachel looked at the picture longer than she needed to. Angela went to the kitchen and brought back water. She had spent years imagining what she might say if she ever met the woman who gave birth to Nick. None of those imagined conversations had included the woman standing in front of her now. Rachel did not look like someone who had arrived to take a possession back. She looked like a mother who had just heard her son say he already had one. Rachel sat down. "You must hate me." I don't know you well enough to hate you, Angela said. Rachel looked up at her. Angela sat across from her. But my son just walked out of this house because you came here. So before I ask him to listen to anything, I need to understand it myself. Rachel wiped her face and took a breath. For the first time since she had entered the house, she stopped asking for Nick. She began telling Angela why she had left him. Rachel began with the part Angela knew the least about. She had been 20 when Nick was born. His father was the man she thought she would build a life with, but instead, he convinced her to put her name on a loan. Rachel did not understand how dangerous the arrangement was until he took the money and disappeared. The debt remained in her name. The people who wanted their money did not care that Rachel had been deceived. They knew where she lived. They knew where she worked. Before long, she was no longer only afraid of what they might do to her. She was afraid of keeping an infant in the middle of it. Rachel told Angela she had left Nick, believing she would be gone for a short time. She would find work, pay what she could, and come back when it was safe. But leaving Dallas did not solve her life as quickly as she had imagined. An opportunity eventually took her to Calgary, where she started with cleaning work and whatever else she could find. Years passed before she had anything that resembled stability. I asked someone to find out about him, Rachel said. I needed to know if he was safe. The person she contacted eventually told her that Nick had been adopted and was being raised by a woman who could give him a stable home. Rachel looked around Angela's living room again. Once I knew that, coming back felt different. Angela asked what she meant. If I came back when he was 5, what was I supposed to do? Tell him I was his mother and ask him to leave the only home he knew? Rachel said she kept working instead. She told herself she would wait until Nick was old enough to hear the truth and make his own choice. The age she chose was 18. Angela listened without interrupting. Rachel had made decisions Angela might not have made herself. She had also lost years she could never recover. But the woman sitting across from her had not forgotten Nick. She had built the last 18 years around the day she believed she could finally return. When Rachel finished, Angela told her there was something she also needed to understand. Angela had not been waiting for Nick's birth mother to come back. She had not spent 18 years thinking of herself as the woman caring for someone else's child. She told Rachel about marrying Daniel at 30, learning 3 years later that she could not become pregnant, and losing her husband when she was 35. She told her about the 5 years that followed and the quiet house she returned to every evening. Then, at 40, Angela had received a call about a 6-month-old boy who needed a permanent home. He cried the first time I held him, Angela said. Rachel managed a small smile. He did, like I was the worst person he had ever met. Angela told her about the first fever that kept her awake all night, the shoes Nick outgrew faster than she could replace them, the school meetings, the questions about his birth mother, and the years when the house was never quiet for long. She did not list everything. 18 years could not be reduced to one conversation. I always told him the truth, Angela said. I never told him you were dead. I never told him you didn't want him. When he asked why you left, I told him I didn't know. Rachel lowered her eyes. Thank you. Angela shook her head. I'm not telling you that so you'll thank me. She waited until Rachel looked at her again. I'm telling you because Nick isn't a little boy waiting for someone to come back and collect him. He has a life here. He has plans. And whatever happens next has to be his choice. Rachel said she understood. This time, Angela believed she did. Before Rachel left, she opened the bag she had brought with her and took out a bank envelope and a folder. She placed them on the table between them. Angela asked what they were. Rachel told her there was $60,000 set aside for her. Angela did not touch the folder. For what? Rachel struggled to explain it without making the money sound like a price. She spoke about food, clothes, doctors, school, and every expense Angela had carried while Rachel was somewhere else. You paid for 18 years that should have been mine too, she said. Please let me give something back. Angela pushed the folder toward her. No, Rachel tried again. Angela, I sold my business. I can afford this. That isn't the point. Then what is? Angela looked at the money Rachel had spent years earning. You worked for this, and you raised my son, Angela corrected her. Our son. Rachel stopped. Angela continued before either of them could stay on those 2 words too long. I didn't raise Nick because you asked me to. I didn't keep receipts waiting for the day you came back. I raised him because I'm his mother. That was my responsibility. Rachel told her the money had always been meant for Nick. Angela pushed it back again. Then keep it for him. He won't take it from me. Maybe not today. Angela told Rachel that Nick would finish school one day. He might get married. He might need help buying a home or starting a family. When that day comes, use it for him. Rachel looked down at the folder. She had come to Dallas believing money was one of the few things she could offer to make up for the years she had missed. Angela would not let her use it to pay for the past. "Go home," Angela said. "Let me talk to Nick." Rachel put the folder back in her bag. Before leaving, she asked if Angela truly believed Nick would ever agree to see her again. Angela did not promise that he would, but I'll ask him to listen. For that day, it was all Rachel had. 18 years earlier, Rachel was 20 years old and raising Nick on her own. She had no savings worth mentioning and no family member in a position to support her for long. Nick's father moved in and out of their lives, but Rachel still believed him when he said he was trying to build something better for them. He told her he had found a way to borrow money for an opportunity that would help all three of them. His own credit and history made it difficult to put the loan in his name. Rachel's did not. She signed the papers because he told her the payments would be covered once the money began coming back. The amount was far larger than anything Rachel had ever borrowed. She did not receive the money herself. Nick's father did. Soon after, he disappeared with it. Rachel was left with a 5-month-old baby and a debt attached to her name. At first, she still believed she could find him or work out some way to repay what was owed. Then the calls began. The men demanding money were not a bank, and they were not interested in payment plans Rachel could manage. The amount grew with fees and interest she had never understood when she signed. Rachel stopped thinking about how to repay it. She began thinking about what would happen when the people looking for her decided phone calls were no longer enough. The people collecting the debt found Rachel's address. The first time someone came to the apartment, Nick was asleep inside. Rachel kept the door locked and spoke through it. The man on the other side knew her name, the amount owed, and where she worked. After he left, Rachel moved Nick's crib farther from the front room, even though she knew that would not protect him from anything. She changed where she stayed for several nights and began taking different routes to work. But the calls continued. Someone appeared near her workplace. Another message made it clear that moving across Dallas would not make the problem disappear. Rachel tried to earn more. She took extra shifts and accepted whatever work she could fit around caring for Nick, but the money she brought home was enough for rent, food, and the baby. It was not enough to clear a debt that kept growing. One evening, Rachel returned to the place where she was staying and found evidence that someone had been there looking for her. Nick was in her arms. For the first time, the danger no longer felt like something happening around him. Rachel understood that as long as the people collecting the money could find her, they could also find her son. She began looking for a way out of Dallas. Rachel did not leave Nick because she had stopped wanting him. She left because every plan she made to keep him with her required money, time, or safety she did not have. She found someone she trusted to take Nick temporarily and told herself the separation would last only until she could get far enough away, find steady work, and make the danger disappear. Nick was 5 months old. Rachel packed what he needed and wrote down the small things another person might not know. How he liked to be held, what helped him settle, and the name she had chosen for him before he was born. She stayed longer than she had planned on the day she left. Each time she tried to go, she found another reason to check something. Eventually, there was nothing left to check. Rachel left Dallas with one bag and very little money. She moved from one temporary arrangement to another before finding a legal opportunity to work in Calgary through an employer willing to hire her. What began as a temporary move eventually became permanent as Rachel built a legal life in Canada. Calgary was farther than she had ever imagined going, and that distance was part of the reason she accepted. She believed distance would give her time. She would work, save, fix what she could, and return for Nick. She did not yet understand how quickly a temporary separation could become years. The woman caring for Nick had agreed to help only temporarily. As the months passed and Rachel still could not safely return, she could no longer keep the baby. Eventually, child welfare became involved, and Nick entered the system that would later place him with Angela. Rachel arrived in Calgary with no business, no property, and no career waiting for her. Her first steady job was cleaning hotel rooms. The work was simple to explain and exhausting to repeat. She stripped beds, scrubbed bathrooms, replaced towels, pushed a heavy cart down long hallways, then did the same thing in the next room. When extra shifts were available, she took them. When they were not, she found other cleaning work. Rachel rented a room instead of an apartment because it cost less. She bought food that would last several meals and learned which expenses could be delayed without causing another problem. At the end of her first month, after rent, food, transportation, and everything required to keep working, Rachel had only $25 she could put aside for Nick. She stared at the amount before placing it in a separate envelope. $25 would not pay back a debt. It would not bring her home. It would not give Nick the years she was already missing. But Rachel kept the envelope. The next month, she added more. Some months she could save $50. Other months, an unexpected expense left almost nothing. Rachel stopped measuring progress by whether she could return to Dallas soon. She measured it by whether the envelope was larger than it had been the month before. Meanwhile, Nick was growing somewhere without her. It took Rachel several years to reach a point where she could think beyond the next month. By then, the people who had once been looking for her were no longer part of her daily life, but returning to Dallas still meant facing everything she had left behind. Before making any decision, Rachel needed to know what had happened to Nick. She contacted someone she still trusted and asked for one thing: find out whether her son was safe. The answer did not come quickly. When it finally did, Rachel learned that Nick had been adopted. The woman raising him had a steady job, a home, and no record that gave anyone reason to worry about his safety. Rachel asked if Nick looked healthy. She asked whether he was still in Dallas. She asked if the woman had other children. The person helping her could answer some questions, but not all of them. What mattered was that Nick had a permanent home. Rachel had spent years imagining that she would return as soon as she had enough money. Now she had to consider what returning would actually do. Nick was no longer a baby waiting where she had left him. He was a child growing up with a mother he knew. Rachel asked whether there was a way to contact Nick, but any attempt to enter his life while he was still a child would have to go through the adults responsible for him, and Rachel began questioning what that contact would actually do to him. She could appear, explain that she had given birth to him, and ask for a place in a life that had continued without her. She did not know whether that would help Nick or only satisfy her own need to see him, so Rachel made another decision that would cost her more years. She would wait until he was old enough to hear the truth and make the choice for himself. She chose 18 because it was the age when no one else could make that decision for him. From then on, Rachel stopped saving for the day she would take a child back. She began preparing for the day she would meet the young man he had become. Rachel remained in Calgary and kept working. Experience made her faster, then reliable enough to be trusted with more responsibility. She moved from cleaning hotel rooms to supervising other workers. The increase in pay was not dramatic, but for the first time, she could save more than whatever happened to remain at the end of the month. The envelope for Nick became a separate savings account. $25 at a time became $50, then a few hundred when Rachel could manage it. She did not put money away on a perfect schedule. There were months when rent increased, something broke, or another expense took priority. But the account continued to grow. Later, Rachel began taking private cleaning jobs outside her regular work. A few clients recommended her to others. She eventually had more work than she could handle alone and paid another woman to help. That was the beginning of the business, though Rachel did not call it one yet. She bought better equipment, registered the company, found regular residential clients, and learned that money coming into a business was not the same as money she could keep. There were supplies, transportation, insurance, taxes, and wages. Some months looked successful until every expense was paid. Rachel kept going. Over time, the client list grew. She hired more workers and spent less of each day cleaning houses herself, though she still stepped in when someone called out or a job needed to be finished. For the first time in her life, Rachel had something she had built rather than something she was trying to escape. As Nick's 18th birthday approached, the business was stable, and the money she had set aside for him had become enough to matter. Rachel had spent years believing that if she worked hard enough, she could return with something valuable to offer. She still did not know whether Nick would want any of it. When Nick was close to 18, Rachel began preparing to leave Canada. She did not intend to visit Dallas, meet him once, and then return to Calgary. If she was asking for a place in her son's life, she wanted to live in the same country and be available for whatever answer he gave her. Rachel sold the cleaning business she had spent years building. The sale gave her enough to return to the United States, establish a new life, and keep the money she had always intended for Nick. She chose Austin rather than Dallas. It was close enough that Nick could visit without crossing the country, but far enough that Rachel would not be building her entire life around the expectation that he would immediately accept her. She rented a home and prepared a room for him anyway. She bought a bed, cleared closet space, and left the rest mostly empty because she did not know what an 18-year-old Nick liked. Rachel also began looking at colleges in and around Austin. She knew Nick was graduating from high school. She knew nothing yet about what he wanted to study, but education was one of the few parts of his future she believed she could help pay for. Only after her new life was ready did Rachel contact the agency and ask to find her son. She had left Dallas at 20 with one bag and almost nothing she could offer him. 18 years later, she returned to the United States with a home, savings, and $60,000 she believed belonged to the years she had missed. None of it prepared her for Nick to look at Angela and say, "I already have a mother." Nick did not return home until that evening. Angela had spent the afternoon wondering whether she should call him, but she knew he needed time without either woman asking him to decide anything. When he finally came through the door, he acted almost as if the morning had not happened. He asked what Angela had made for dinner. He complained that he was hungry. He left his shoes where she had told him not to leave them for years. Angela let him. They ate together and talked about ordinary things until Angela mentioned Rachel's name. Nick stopped eating. "Mom, I don't want to talk about her." Angela told him he did not have to make any decision. "Good. Then there's nothing to talk about." He carried his plate to the kitchen and changed the subject. The next day, Angela tried again. Nick found another reason to leave the room. 2 days later, she told him Rachel had explained why she left. "I said I don't want to hear it." Nick was not angry with Angela. He still drove her to the store, carried the heavier bags, and asked whether her knees were hurting when rain was expected. But the moment Rachel entered the conversation, he closed the subject. Angela could have forced him to sit down and listen. She did not. Nick had spent 18 years knowing there was a woman somewhere who had given birth to him. Now that woman had appeared without warning and asked him to leave with her. Angela understood why he wanted his life to return to what it had been before the doorbell rang. She also knew it could not. A few days later, Nick came home and stopped when he saw the table. Angela had cooked several of his favorite dishes on the same evening. He looked at the food, then at her. "What did you do?" "Nothing." Nick pulled out a chair but did not sit down. "You only cook all this when you want something." Angela began serving the food. "Can a mother feed her son? Not like this." Angela ignored him and told him to eat before it got cold. Nick sat down. For several minutes, she said nothing about Rachel. She asked about his plans for the week. Nick answered carefully, waiting for the real reason behind the dinner. Halfway through the meal, he put down his fork. "Fine," Angela kept eating. "Fine, what? What do you want to say? I don't know what you mean." Nick leaned back in his chair. "Mom," Angela finally looked at him. "I want you to listen to what happened to Rachel." Nick immediately started to object. Angela stopped him. "You don't have to forgive her." He said nothing. "You don't have to call her mom. You don't have to go anywhere with her." Nick looked down at his plate. Angela continued, "But I think you should know why she left before you decide what kind of person she is." Nick asked why Angela cared so much after knowing Rachel for only one morning. "Because I spent 18 years answering questions I didn't have the answers to," she said. "Now I do." Nick remained at the table. That was enough for Angela to continue. Angela told Nick what Rachel had told her. She explained that Rachel had been 20 when he was born, that his father had put a dangerous debt in her name and disappeared, and that the people collecting it had found where she lived and worked. She told him Rachel had left Dallas, believing the separation would be temporary. Nick listened without interrupting at first. When Angela reached the years in Calgary, he asked the question that mattered most to him. "If she knew I was here, why didn't she come back?" Angela gave him Rachel's answer. By the time Rachel found out Nick had been adopted, he was already growing up in a stable home. She had decided not to appear while he was still a child and force herself into his life. "So she waited 18 years and thought that made it better?" Nick asked. "No," Angela said. "I don't think she believes anything makes it better." Nick pushed his plate away. He was no longer refusing to listen, but he was not ready to excuse Rachel either. Angela did not ask him to. She told him about the cleaning work, the business Rachel had built, and the fact that she had sold it before returning to the United States. She did not mention the $60,000. That conversation had been between the two women, and Angela did not want money influencing Nick's decision. When she finished, Nick asked what Angela wanted him to do. Meet her once more. And then what? Then you decide, Nick asked whether Angela would be disappointed if he still wanted nothing to do with Rachel. No. You promise? I promise. Nick looked at the food Angela had used to keep him at the table long enough to hear the story. You could have just asked. Angela pointed at him with her fork. I did. For 3 days. Nick had no answer to that. By the end of the evening, he agreed to see Rachel again. Nick agreed to meet Rachel again, but only after making Angela promise she would come with him. Rachel was still in Dallas, waiting to hear whether Nick would give her another chance. When she saw him arrive with Angela, she did not try to hug him or move closer than he wanted. Nick sat down across from her. Mom told me what happened. Rachel looked at Angela, then back at Nick. She shouldn't have had to explain it for me. Then explain it, Rachel did. This time, she did not begin with the room waiting in Austin or the life she wanted to give him now. She told Nick what she had done and what she had failed to do. She had signed the loan. She had trusted the wrong man. She had left Dallas. She had left her 5-month-old son behind. Rachel explained the danger, Calgary, the years of work, and the day she learned he had been adopted. Nick listened, then asked the question he had already asked Angela. Why didn't you come back when you knew I was safe? Rachel answered without trying to make the choice sound noble. Because by then, you had a mother. Nick glanced at Angela. Rachel continued. I told myself I was protecting your life. Maybe part of me was afraid you'd hate me sooner. Nick asked whether she had really expected him to leave with her after one meeting. Rachel admitted that she had imagined the moment too many times. In those versions, Nick had always wanted the same thing she wanted. That wasn't fair to you. Nick did not forgive her. He did not call her mom. But when Rachel finished, he remained in his seat. For the first time, he was looking at her as more than the woman who had abandoned him. Rachel told Nick she would not ask him to move permanently. Instead, she asked him to come to Austin and give the life she had prepared a chance. Come see the city. Look at the schools. Stay with me for a while. Nick told her he had already been looking at colleges around Dallas. Rachel asked what he wanted to study. When Nick explained that he hoped to follow a pre-med path and eventually apply to medical school, Rachel understood why Angela had mentioned his future so carefully. Let me help with school, she said. Nick rejected the offer before she finished. I don't need you to pay me to be your son. Rachel accepted the anger behind the answer. I'm not trying to buy you. She told him she could not give back the years she had missed, but she could help with years that had not happened yet. College would be expensive. Medical school, if Nick reached it, would cost far more. Rachel had spent years saving because she had always intended the money to be used for him. Come to Austin. Look at the schools there. If you hate it, you can go back. Nick asked what happened if he finished college and wanted to return to Dallas anyway. Then you return to Dallas? And you won't say I used you for tuition? Rachel shook her head. I already missed 18 years. I'm not going to spend the next 4 keeping score. Nick did not agree that day. But for the first time, the idea followed him home. For the next several days, Nick kept returning to the same problem. Staying in Dallas was familiar. His friends were there. The schools he had already considered were there. Most importantly, Angela was there. Austin offered something he had never planned for, a chance to know Rachel and financial help with a path that could take more than a decade to complete. Nick tried to discuss the decision as if it were only about college, but Angela knew what he was avoiding. You don't want to leave me, she said. Nick did not deny it. Why would I? Because you're 18. That's not an answer. Angela reminded him of the questions he had asked as a child. Who was his birth mother? Why had she left? Did she remember him? For years, Angela had been unable to answer. Now Rachel was offering Nick the chance to find out for himself. What if I go and you need me? Nick asked. I managed before you learned how to massage a knee. Not very well. Angela gave him a look. Nick smiled, but the concern remained. He told her he did not want her working longer or putting off things she needed because of his education. Angela refused to let guilt make the decision for him in either direction. Don't go because Rachel has money, and don't stay because my knees hurt. Then what am I supposed to do? Go see what your life could be. Nick asked how long she expected him to stay. Angela told him that was for him to decide. He could spend time in Austin, look at the schools, get to know Rachel, and then choose what came next. And if I hate it? Angela answered without hesitation. Then you know the way home. Nick finally agreed to go. The decision gave Rachel what she had waited 18 years for, but it required Angela to return to the house she had once spent 5 years living in alone. This time, the person leaving was her son. Nick packed for Austin as if he were leaving for a short visit. He took clothes, his laptop, school documents, and the things he used every day. Most of what remained stayed in his room in Dallas. Angela helped him check what he had packed even after Nick told her several times that he could do it himself. On the morning he left, Rachel arrived to drive him to Austin. Angela stood near the car while the last bag went into the trunk. Nick reminded her where he had left the heating pad, which medicine she usually took, and the number of a neighbor she could call if she needed help carrying anything heavy. "I lived alone before you," Angela told him. "That was before your knees got old. My knees are 58. The rest of me is younger." Nick hugged her. Neither of them tried to make the goodbye longer than it already was. During the drive south, Rachel did not ask Nick how he felt about leaving Angela. She talked about the house, the area where she lived, and the things they could do once he had settled in. When they arrived, Rachel showed him the room she had prepared. There was a bed, a desk, and an empty closet. She had avoided decorating because she did not know what he liked. Nick set his bag down and looked around. "You did all this before you knew I'd come?" Rachel admitted that she had. Nick did not know what to say. That evening, after Rachel went to bed, he called Angela. He asked whether she had eaten. Angela asked the same question. They talked for nearly an hour about a day they had both just lived separately. The first weeks in Austin were filled with small discoveries. Rachel learned that Nick stayed up later than she expected and could finish most of the food she had planned to last several days. Nick learned that Rachel woke early even when she had nowhere to be and kept cleaning supplies arranged with the precision of someone who had spent years running a cleaning business. They went grocery shopping together, and Rachel kept asking what he wanted until Nick finally told her she did not need to buy everything he picked up. She took him to places around Austin, introduced him to people she knew, and tried to learn the parts of his life she had missed without asking 18 years of questions at once. Some conversations were easy. Others reminded both of them how little history they shared. Rachel knew the names she had given him, but not the foods he hated as a child. She knew his birthday, but had never attended one. Nick knew why she had left, but not how she took her coffee or what made her laugh. They learned those things slowly. Meanwhile, Angela remained part of Nick's day. He sent her pictures, called to tell her about places he had seen, and asked whether her joints were hurting. Angela told him about work, the house, and small things that did not require a phone call but received one anyway. Rachel never complained about how often he contacted her. She understood that getting to know one mother did not require Nick to speak less to the other. Once Nick had settled in, Rachel began helping him explore colleges in the Austin area. They looked at programs, admission requirements, science courses, and the steps that could prepare him for a future medical school application. Nick visited campuses and spoke with advisors. For the first time, the idea of staying in Austin became more than something Rachel wanted. He could see how a college life there might work. Rachel also began asking practical questions Angela had always had to consider: tuition, books, transportation, and how much support Nick would need if he studied full-time. The numbers were larger than he liked. A pre-med path was only the beginning. If he eventually entered medical school, the years of education and the cost would continue far beyond college. Rachel told him she had prepared to help. Nick was still uncomfortable accepting money from her, but the offer was different now that he knew what she had spent years building. He also knew what refusing could mean for Angela. She had never complained about helping him, but Nick had seen enough bills on the kitchen table to understand that love did not make tuition cheaper. He did not choose a school yet. Instead, he kept comparing the options in Austin with the plans he had made in Dallas. For the first time, both futures seemed possible. As the weeks passed, Nick stopped feeling like a guest. He learned his way around the neighborhood, began handling parts of his college planning on his own, and spent more time outside the house. Rachel no longer planned every day for him. They had started building a routine that did not require constant effort. Nick still contacted Angela often, but the timing changed. A message she sent in the morning sometimes sat unanswered until afternoon. If she called while Nick was out, he might text that he would call later and then forget until the next day. The long conversations that had filled his first weeks in Austin became shorter. Some days, several small things happened that Nick would once have told Angela about, but by evening, he was tired and decided he would tell her another time. Angela never complained. When Nick apologized for missing a call, she told him he did not need to report to her every day. "You're supposed to have a life," she said. Nick believed her. He did not hear what happened after the calls ended. Angela placing the phone beside her and returning to a house where no one else would come through the door that night. Nick had not stopped loving or missing her. He was doing exactly what both Angela and Rachel had asked him to do. He was giving the new life a real chance. Angela had expected the house to feel different after Nick left. She had not expected how often she would forget he was gone. The first time she went grocery shopping alone, she put 2 of Nick's usual snacks in the cart before remembering there was no reason to buy them. She stood there for a few seconds, then put one back and kept the other. At home, Angela still cooked too much. For 18 years, she had learned to prepare enough food for a growing boy who often went back for a second serving. Now the leftovers stayed in the refrigerator for days. She stopped asking Nick whether he would be home for dinner, stopped hearing his car outside, and stopped finding things he had left where they did not belong. The house was cleaner than it had been in years. Angela did not enjoy it as much as she once thought she would. She continued going to work and managing her life as before. When her joints hurt, she used the heating pad or massaged her own hands. She had done those things before Nick was old enough to help, and she could do them again. What was harder to replace were the habits that required no planning. One evening, Angela came home with a story about something that had happened at work. She set down her bag and began speaking before she reached the living room. Halfway through the first sentence, she remembered no one was there. Another time, she saw something while shopping and turned to make a comment to Nick. A stranger was standing beside her. Angela apologized and moved on. She did not tell Nick about moments like those when he called. She asked about Austin, the schools, and whether he was eating properly. If his life there was beginning to work, Angela did not want her empty house to become another problem he felt responsible for solving. For a while, Austin stayed new enough to keep Nick occupied. Then the places Rachel had shown him became familiar. The college visits became another part of his schedule, and ordinary life replaced the excitement of arriving. That was when Dallas began appearing in small parts of his day. At a store, Nick passed a shelf of heating pads and joint creams and stopped to check a product Angela had never tried. He almost put it in the cart before remembering he was more than 200 miles away from the person he wanted to buy it for. While grocery shopping with Rachel, he reached for something Angela usually bought, then realized no one in Rachel's house ate it. One afternoon, something happened that Nick knew would make Angela laugh. He took out his phone to call her, saw how late it was, and decided to wait until the next day. The next day became busy. By the time he remembered again, the story no longer seemed worth a phone call. Nick began noticing how many parts of his relationship with Angela had never depended on important conversations. Most of it had happened while carrying groceries, sitting in the car, eating dinner, or passing through the same room. A phone call could keep them connected, but it could not recreate a life built from being beside someone every day. Rachel could see when Nick missed Dallas. She did not ask him to hide it. She also did not try to fill every empty space Angela had left. Rachel continued building the relationship they could have instead of pretending they already had the one she had missed. Nick continued visiting schools and comparing programs. He took the process seriously because he had promised both women he would give Austin a real chance. Some of the options were good. Rachel could help with the cost, and staying with her would give him support while he adjusted to college. On paper, there was no clear reason to reject the city. The problem appeared whenever Nick tried to imagine staying. He could picture attending classes in Austin. He could picture studying there for a year. What he could not picture was the rest of his life naturally growing around it. His friends were in Dallas. The streets he knew were in Dallas. The house where he had grown up was there. So was Angela. Nick began comparing every Austin option to the schools he had considered before Rachel returned. The more information he gathered, the less certain he became that moving his entire future was necessary. One day, after another campus visit, Rachel asked what he thought. Nick gave her the same kind of answer he had been giving for weeks. The program was good. The campus was fine. He needed more time. Rachel did not push him. Nick returned to his room and opened the information he had saved about schools near Dallas. He had come to Austin expecting that enough time might make the city feel like his next home. Instead, he was beginning to understand that a good opportunity and the right life were not always the same thing. By the end of 5 months, Nick and Rachel had built something real. He no longer saw her only as the woman who had left him. He knew the life she had lived, the work she had done, and the years she had spent preparing for a son who might never accept her. They could eat together without searching for something to say. Nick sometimes told her where he was going without being asked. Rachel had stopped worrying that one wrong sentence would send him back to Dallas. But none of that gave Nick the 18 years they had missed. He cared about Rachel now. He wanted her in his life. He still did not feel that Austin was where he wanted to build that life. Nick had not yet told either mother what he was thinking. He wanted to be certain before disappointing Rachel, and he did not want Angela to believe he was returning because she could not manage without him. Then weather alerts began appearing for North Texas. Dallas was expecting a severe storm with heavy rain and strong winds. Nick checked the forecast more than once. He knew what Angela did whenever bad weather was coming. She went into the yard, moved anything the wind might carry, checked the outdoor furniture, and insisted on doing more than her joints could comfortably handle. That afternoon, Nick sent her a message. "Did you bring everything in from the yard?" He put down his phone and continued with his day. An hour later, Angela still had not answered. Nick checked his phone again an hour later. Angela still had not answered. He sent another message, this time asking her to call when she saw it. By late afternoon, the weather in Dallas had worsened. The forecast showed heavy rain moving through the area, with strong winds expected into the evening. Nick called. The phone rang until the call ended. He waited several minutes and tried again. No answer. Rachel noticed him checking his phone. Nick told her Angela had not responded since that afternoon. Rachel reminded him that Angela might have left her phone somewhere or gone to sleep. Nick knew both were possible. He also knew Angela usually answered eventually, especially after seeing several missed calls from him. He called again before dinner, then again after dark. Each time, the result was the same. Nick tried a neighbor whose number Angela had once given him. No one answered there either. He checked the storm updates and saw reports of downed branches and scattered power problems in parts of the Dallas area. Nick pictured Angela outside before the rain, moving things she should have asked someone else to move. He remembered the way her knees hurt after standing too long and how quickly cold, wet weather made the pain worse. Rachel asked when he had last spoken to her. Nick checked the call history. It had been longer than he realized. By then, he was no longer waiting for Angela to call back. He was deciding how quickly he could get to Dallas. Nick picked up his keys. Rachel asked where he was going, even though she already knew. Dallas. She looked toward the window. Rain had begun falling in Austin, too. "You can wait until morning," Nick shook his head. "If she calls while I'm driving, I'll turn around." Rachel did not try to stop him. She told him to take the safest route, slow down if the rain became too heavy, and call her when he arrived. Nick packed almost nothing. He took a jacket, his phone charger, and the keys. The drive that normally took a little over 3 hours took longer that night. Rain reduced visibility on parts of the highway, and traffic slowed where water collected on the road. Nick kept his phone connected through the car. Every time the screen changed, he checked whether Angela had called. She had not. He tried her again at a stop. Still nothing. As he got closer to Dallas, the weather worsened. Wind pushed rain across the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. Nick thought about the last 5 months. He had missed calls because he was busy. He had answered messages hours later because he assumed there would always be another one. Angela had never complained. Now, for the first time, Nick could not reach her when he needed to. He kept driving. By the time Nick reached the house, the worst of the rain had begun to move through, but the yard showed what had happened earlier. One outdoor chair was lying on its side. Small branches were scattered across the ground. Nick parked and ran to the door. The house was dark except for a light in the hallway. He called Angela's name as soon as he entered. No answer came from the living room or kitchen. He found her in the bedroom. Angela was lying under the blankets, still wearing the clothes she had put on that morning. Nick crossed the room and touched her forehead. She was hot. Angela opened her eyes and stared at him as if she was not sure he was really there. "Nick? Why didn't you answer your phone?" Angela tried to sit up, then stopped when pain moved through her knees and back. She told him she had gone outside before the storm to bring things in. The work had taken longer than she expected. By the time she came inside, her joints were aching badly and she had begun feeling feverish. She lay down, intending to rest. Her phone was in the kitchen. Nick asked why she had not called someone. Angela gave him a tired answer. "I was going to get up." Nick looked at the woman who had spent 18 years telling him not to worry about her. Then he left the room to find the phone, water, medicine, and everything else she should have had beside the bed. Nick found Angela's phone on the kitchen counter. The battery was nearly dead, and the screen was filled with his missed calls and messages. He plugged it in, brought water and medicine to the bedroom, then went back to the kitchen to make something she could eat. Angela tried to tell him she was not hungry. Nick ignored her. He returned with a small bowl and waited until she had eaten enough to take the medicine. Then he found the heating pad, brought another blanket, and checked her temperature again. Her fever was high, but she was awake, answering him clearly and able to drink water. Nick stayed beside her and kept checking on her through the night. When the pain in her knees kept her from sleeping, he sat at the end of the bed and began massaging them the way he had done since he was a teenager. "You drove all the way from Austin for this?" Angela asked. "I called you all afternoon. My phone was in the kitchen," I noticed. "Then you know why I didn't answer." Nick looked at her. "That does not make it better." Angela stopped arguing. The medicine gradually brought the fever down, and the warmth helped with the stiffness in her joints. Nick continued working his hands around one knee while Angela rested. It had been 5 months since they had sat together like this. In Austin, Nick had learned new roads, visited schools, and built a relationship with the woman who had given birth to him. But sitting beside Angela's bed, he did not have to learn what she needed. He already knew where she kept the medicine, which heating pad worked better, how much pressure she could tolerate when her knees hurt, and when she was saying she was fine only because she wanted him to stop worrying. Near morning, Angela fell asleep. Nick stayed in the chair beside the bed until he was certain her fever was coming down. Angela was feeling better by the following day. The fever had dropped, and she could move around the house again, though Nick refused to let her do much. He cleaned up the yard after the storm, put the outdoor furniture back in place, and made sure everything Angela needed was within reach. By the second day, she was already complaining that he was treating her like she could not take care of herself. Nick took that as proof she was recovering. That evening, they sat together in the living room. Angela asked the question she had been waiting to ask since he arrived. "When are you going back to Austin?" Nick did not answer right away. "I'm not." Angela turned toward him. "What do you mean?" "I'm staying here." Angela told him he could not make a decision about his future because she had been sick for 2 days. Nick had expected that answer. "I'm not staying because you had a fever." "Then why are you staying?" Nick told her the decision had started long before the storm. He had given Austin a real chance. He had visited schools, looked at programs, and spent enough time there to know what daily life would be like. More importantly, he had gotten to know Rachel. "I'm glad I went," he said. "I needed to know her." Angela listened. Nick told her he no longer hated Rachel. He understood why she had left, even if part of him still wished she had made different choices. He wanted her in his life. But none of that had made Austin feel like home. "You can build a home somewhere new," Angela said. "I know." "Then don't come back just because this is easier." Nick shook his head. "It isn't about easier," Angela waited. "For 5 months, I kept trying to figure out why everything there felt like it should work, but didn't. The schools were fine. Rachel was good to me. I had a room, money for college, everything I was supposed to need. Then what was missing?" Nick looked at her. "My life." Angela started to speak, but he continued. "It's here. The schools I wanted before any of this happened are here. The friends I grew up with are here. And you're here." Angela told him that last reason was exactly what worried her. "Nick, I don't want you choosing your whole future because my knees hurt. And I don't want you acting like I'm only here because you need someone to massage them." Angela gave him a look. "You're not even that good at it. Then I guess I need to stay and practice." Angela tried not to smile. Nick moved closer. "Mom, you told me to go because I needed to find out who Rachel was. I did. She's my mother too. I want her in my life." He paused. "But you're my home." Angela looked away from him. Nick gave her time before continuing. "I spent 5 months trying to make a life there because I thought leaving meant I had to choose her, and coming back meant I was rejecting her." "It doesn't." Angela asked whether Rachel knew. Nick said he would call her. He would tell her himself, and he would keep calling after that. He would visit. He would let her be part of whatever came next, but he would go to college in Dallas and build his future there. Angela reminded him that Rachel had offered to help with school. "Then I'll talk to her about school," Nick said. From here, Angela finally reached for his hand. You're sure? Nick held it. I was sure before the storm. The storm just got me home faster. Angela did not tell him to reconsider again. Nick had spent 18 years wondering about the woman who gave birth to him. He had spent 5 months learning who she was. Now he had made a choice that did not require losing either mother. He stayed in Dallas. Nick called Rachel before making any other plans. He told her Angela was recovering and then explained that he would not be returning to live in Austin. Rachel was silent long enough for Nick to know the answer hurt. Is this because she got sick? She asked. Nick told her what he had told Angela. The decision had started before the storm. He had given Austin 5 months, visited schools, and tried to imagine building his future there. He was grateful he had gone because the time had allowed him to know Rachel as a person instead of carrying the same anger for the rest of his life. But he wanted to study in Dallas. Rachel asked if that meant the 5 months with her had failed. No, Nick said. If I hadn't gone, I'd probably still hate you. Rachel let out a small laugh that did not completely hide her disappointment. Nick continued before she could misunderstand him. I'm not going back to how things were before you came. I still want you in my life. He told her he would visit Austin and expected her to come to Dallas. Rachel reminded him that she had offered to help with college. Nick hesitated. Accepting the offer still felt different from accepting Angela's help. Rachel did not push. She told him to choose the school first, then they could talk about what he actually needed. Nick agreed. Over the following months, he returned to the plans he had made before graduation and chose a college path in the Dallas area that would allow him to begin the science courses required for his pre-med goals. Rachel helped with education expenses, but the arrangement was no longer tied to Nick living with her. Angela continued working, and Nick continued living at home while starting college. Their old routines returned, though not exactly as they had been. Nick had classes and a busier schedule. Angela learned not to expect him at every dinner. When he came home late, she still worried, but she no longer called after 10 minutes. Nick still checked on her joints, though Angela reminded him that college was supposed to make him a doctor, not turn him into her full-time massage therapist. He also kept his promise to Rachel. The calls did not stop after he returned to Dallas. He visited Austin. Rachel came to see him. Some weeks they spoke often. Other weeks life became busy and several days passed. They were no longer trying to recover 18 years in a few months. They were building the years that were still ahead. Returning to the United States had required Rachel to build a life that did not depend entirely on whether Nick chose her. After he moved back to Dallas, she remained in Austin. About a year later, she met a widower who had also learned what it meant to rebuild after losing the life he once expected to have. Rachel did not rush the relationship. For most of her adult life, every major decision had been connected to survival, work, or the son she hoped to see again. This time, she allowed something to develop without asking what it could repair. Nick knew about the man before Angela did. Rachel mentioned him during a phone call, and Nick immediately began asking enough questions to make her regret bringing it up. When Nick later told Angela, she was just as interested. So your mother has a boyfriend, Angela said. Nick looked at her. You know you're my mother too. I know. That's why I get to ask questions. The relationship became serious. Rachel eventually married him, and shortly before turning 40, she became pregnant. At 40, she gave birth to a daughter. The pregnancy surprised everyone, including Rachel. When she called Nick, she had barely finished telling him before he began calculating the age difference between himself and the baby. I'm going to be old enough to look like her father. Rachel told him that was his problem. Angela heard the news later that evening. She was happy for Rachel, but the age stayed with her, 40. It was the same age Angela had been when she finally accepted that she would never give birth to a child and began the process that led her to Nick. Rachel had returned to America hoping to recover a son she had lost. Instead, within a few years, she had a husband, a son who chose to keep her in his life, and another child on the way. After Rachel gave birth to a daughter, Nick went to Austin to meet his little sister. Angela went with him. By then, the two women no longer needed Nick to be the only reason they spoke. They had stayed in contact through his college plans, visits, and the ordinary complications of sharing a place in the same person's life. Rachel was holding the baby when Angela entered the room. Nick went straight to his sister and announced that she looked too small. Rachel told him he had once been smaller. You weren't there, Nick said. The room went quiet for half a second. Then Nick smiled. Angela has pictures. Rachel threw a small pillow at him. It was the kind of joke that would have been impossible a few years earlier. Angela sat beside Rachel and took the baby when she offered her. She held the little girl carefully and studied her face. Rachel noticed how long she looked. "What?" Angela asked. "Nothing. You're looking at me," Rachel smiled. "You're jealous." Angela denied it. Rachel reminded her that she had been 40 when she adopted Nick and had once wanted a baby of her own. Angela looked down at the child in her arms. "Fine, a little." Nick, standing nearby, put a hand to his chest. "After everything I've done for you?" Angela looked at him. "You cried the first time I held you. I was 6 months old, and she hasn't cried once. So far, she's winning," Rachel laughed. Angela handed the baby back after a while, but there was no bitterness in the moment. At 40, Angela had believed becoming a mother required giving up the dream of ever seeing herself in a child. 18 years later, the son she had raised was standing beside her, teasing both women as his baby sister slept in Rachel's arms. Before they left Austin, Nick promised to visit again soon. This time, when he said goodbye to Rachel, he hugged her without having to think about whether doing so changed what Angela meant to him. Several years passed. Nick continued along the path he had chosen, and the boy who once depended on Angela for everything gradually built an adult life of his own. Then one evening, he told her he was bringing someone home for dinner. Angela immediately wanted to know who. "A friend," Nick said. "Do you cook this much for all your friends?" Angela asked. Nick had no answer. The young woman arrived that weekend. Angela noticed the way Nick watched her before she noticed anything else. He checked whether she needed something before she asked, listened when she spoke, and looked more nervous about Angela's opinion than he wanted either woman to know. Angela did not interrogate her. She asked about her family, her work, and the things she and Nick liked to do together. By the end of dinner, Nick's girlfriend was helping Angela carry dishes into the kitchen even after Angela told her to leave them. Later, when Nick walked her to the car, Angela waited until he returned. "Well?" he asked. "Well, what?" "You know what?" Angela made him wait. Then she told him she liked her. Nick tried to act as if the answer did not matter very much. Angela knew better. The relationship lasted. When Nick eventually decided to propose, Rachel was one of the first people he called. She came to Dallas for the wedding, bringing with her the money Angela had refused years earlier. The $60,000 had remained set aside for Nick. Rachel had once tried to use it to repay Angela for raising him. Now, with Angela's approval, she gave it to Nick and his wife to help them begin their life together. Nick did not know the full story behind the money until then. When Angela explained what Rachel had tried to do on the first day they met, he looked at both women. "You two made decisions about my wedding before I even had a girlfriend?" Angela answered first. "Someone had to plan ahead," Rachel agreed. The money that could never pay for 18 missing years was finally used for years that had not happened yet. Marriage changed Nick's life, but it did not move Angela out of it. His wife understood from the beginning that Angela was not a temporary responsibility Nick would eventually hand to someone else. She became part of the family they were building. As the years passed and Nick became more financially stable, the old house began creating problems Angela did not need. There were repairs, outdoor work, and spaces that were less comfortable as her joint pain became more persistent. Nick began talking about moving. Angela resisted. The house held most of her adult life. She had lived there with Daniel. She had returned to it alone after his death. She had carried 6-month-old Nick through the front door and watched him grow up in every room. Nick did not ask her to leave those memories behind. He asked her to bring them with her. Eventually, the family sold the old house and bought a larger, more comfortable home where Angela could live with Nick and his wife while still having space of her own. The new house required less from her physically and gave the family room to grow. On the day they moved in, Nick showed Angela one purchase he had made without asking her. A full-body massage chair was waiting for her. Angela stared at it. "How much did you spend on that?" "Don't ask questions you don't want answered." "Nick, sit down." Angela complained that she had managed without an expensive machine for years. Nick reminded her that he had spent those years doing the work for free. She sat in the chair and turned it on. A few seconds later, she told him it was pressing too hard. Nick adjusted it. Then it was too soft. He adjusted it again. His wife watched from the doorway. "You could have saved the money and kept doing it yourself," Angela said. Nick shook his head. "I'm retiring." Angela settled back into the chair. "Good. The machine is better." Nick walked away before she could see him smiling. In time, Nick and his wife had a child of their own. Angela had spent years thinking she understood how much a baby could change a house. Then her grandchild arrived and proved she had forgotten. Bottles appeared in the kitchen again. Toys returned to the floor. Someone was always looking for something that had been in the same place 5 minutes earlier. Angela was no longer the 40-year-old woman learning how to hold a crying 6-month-old. Now she watched Nick walk through the house with his own child in his arms. Sometimes she gave advice. Sometimes Nick reminded her that he was the one who had studied medicine. Angela reminded him that she had kept him alive long before he knew what pre-med meant. Rachel remained part of their lives. She visited with her husband and daughter, and Nick took his wife, child, and Angela to see them as well. The two families did not pretend the past had happened differently. Rachel had missed Nick's childhood. Angela had raised him. Nick had left for Austin and then chosen to return. None of those truths had to be removed for the family to continue growing. One day, Angela went shopping with Nick, his wife, and their child. Years earlier, she had walked through the same kinds of stores alone and noticed women with children beside them. She had watched mothers load groceries into cars, answer endless questions, and continue conversations while carrying bags. Back then, Angela had always returned home alone. Now Nick was beside her, carrying most of the bags because he still did not trust her knees. His wife walked nearby with their child. Angela stopped for a moment to adjust something in the shopping cart. Nick had already walked several steps ahead before he noticed. He turned back. "Mom, are you coming?" Angela looked at him. At 40, she had brought home a 6-month-old boy because she wanted the chance to become a mother. She had never given birth to him. She had never needed to. "I'm coming," she said. Then Angela walked after her family. Nick had once been caught between two mothers. One had given him life and spent 18 years trying to find her way back. The other had raised him from 6 months old and given him 18 years of her own life. How could he choose one without hurting the other? Rachel had made mistakes, but she had also been 20 years old, alone, and running from a danger she believed could reach her son. Angela had never given birth to Nick, but every day of his childhood had been hers to carry. Perhaps that was why there was never a simple answer to who Nick should choose. In the end, he did not have to choose at all. He returned to Angela because she was the home he had known his entire life, while making room for Rachel in the years that still remained. Neither woman got everything she wanted. Angela could never have the child she once dreamed of giving birth to. Rachel could never recover the 18 years she had missed. But neither woman was wrong for loving the same son in the only way life had allowed her to. If you were Nick, caught between the mother who gave you life and the mother who spent 18 years raising you, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments. And if this story touched you, please like the video and follow the channel for more stories like this.